Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I just finished watching Gina Carano's new movie with the Daily Wire, Terror on the Prairie. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. Not because of any of the, peripheral stuff from a meta sense that are going on with this movie, but I love Westerns, and not the Westerns that have been popular the last 50, 60 years. I mean, like classic Westerns, more the books though, like Louis L'Amour books. I grew up reading so many of those. He has hundreds and hundreds of books, and I've read most of them. It's just he was known for very simple stories like this that didn't have any qualms about being better. It was just, hey, frontier people doing the best they can. And that was a staple of his series and all his different books. And this one felt like it could fit in soundly within a Louis L'Amour novel. And I love that about it. It reminded me a lot of Ride the River, some Sackett's books. Like, it was very much trying to just show the Western world back in the day with no qualms about right and wrong, and a lot of gray, morally gray people, because that was the staple of the era, and just try to tell a good story as authentically as possible without trying to be anything bigger. And I really appreciated it for that and loved it for it. There are some flaws in it that I did recognize. Some were like creative differences that I would disagree with, that can't necessarily be called objective flaws. And then there were some things from a filmmaker's perspective that I think were done poorly. But before I get into those, there will be brief spoilers ahead, very minor, so spoiler alert. But yeah, Terror in the Prairie follows Gina Carano's character. Her husband, and their two children moved out to the frontier, trying to live off the land, have a simple life, and really connect with the world around them. And it's a very common story of the era. The West was like the great equalizer of the era. Anyone from anywhere could go and make it out. It was only your will and the strength of your arm that could determine whether or not you'd survive. No class struggles really applied in that era. And just the further west you went, the more wild it went, and the more it was about you as a person rather than where you came from or your backstory or anything like that. It was the great equalizer, and that is why it's considered such a romantic era, at least from a storytelling perspective, why people keep going back to it, because it's a great equalizer. And I really love that about the Western era and the Louis L'Amour books. And this movie did a great job at portraying that. So yeah, they're trying to make it out on the frontier. The husband, Jeb, who has a great relationship with Gina, even though they don't have very many scenes together. I got some chemistry out of them and could understand their relationship, and it was very wholesome. The whole family, very wholesome, and it wasn't trying to make any sort of statements. And that can be said of the entire movie. It wasn't trying to make any statements about anything meta with Gina Carano or Disney or anything like that. It just had a story it wanted to tell, and it told it. And it was very good at doing that. And so, yeah, Jeb's gone into town, the husband's gone into town, and these riders show up, start, hanging out. And at first it seems like they're just passing through. And at first I did think that's what was going on. And I was really upset that Gina Carano's character, she made a very dumb decision, at least from her perspective. Later on, it ended up not mattering and was actually worked out. But when she realized that these were less than reputable men, when she found the scalps on their saddlebags, she decided to point a gun at them, tell them to leave their guns and go. But by telling them to leave their guns, that guaranteed that they would return. Guns are the most valuable possession of anyone in the West. So making them all leave their guns there, they were going to come back for them. And of course, they had spares and their rifles on their horses. So I saw that as a dumb decision. Really didn't affect the plot in the end. Like, the bad guys were there for a specific reason, to use her as bait to get revenge on her husband. So it worked out in the end, but that was a very dumb decision from her perspective. That pissed me off, but it ended up being totally fine in the end. So she holds him off for as long as she can. She tries to escape. Jeb shows up. They try to fight him together, and then they ultimately beat and kill all the bad guys. And it was very well done. It was very simple, and the villain was definitely by far the best part of the film. He had a presence about him. You could understand why he was so upset. I mean, his daughter was murdered by Jeb and his platoon or whatever, so you could understand where he was coming from. Again, two wrongs don't make a right, so the movie doesn't have any qualms about morally condemning him, but it's like, hey, you can see why he turned to this dark path that he was on, the villain. He did a really good job. Quoting the Bible verses was a neat touch, and I really liked it. And then all the realism with it, with the violence, was gruesome, visceral, everything that I wanted from a Western movie like this that you got in the Louis L'Amour books. It was just very realistic, and it just so well done. And I love that scene at the beginning with the Native Americans. That was definitely something that Louis L'Amour would have written about, just connecting with the natives, respecting them, but not really understanding them. It's exactly how he would have written it. Now, there are some other issues that have been mentioned. I think the script is very tight. It just made decisions that I necessarily wouldn't have made. Like, it doesn't decide to develop its side characters very much beyond the Gina Carano and the villain. They're the only ones who really get any sort of development. That was a choice, a creative choice, not necessarily objectively good or a bad one. So can't really blame it for that. But beyond that, the script was very tight. I think most of the problems with this film come from the filmmaker side of things, the technical side of things. Like the cinematography, I thought was not very good. Some really lackluster shots. The scene transitions, especially, were pretty abrupt. And it's just stuff like that that really drove things down. And the pacing did become an issue for me, not necessarily from the writing, but more from the cinematography side. There were a lot of issues with that. And as Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers said in his review, the lack of music was disconcerting, but it was meant for realism. So that was another creative choice that I may have disagreed with, but can't necessarily call it a flaw in a sense because it was doing exactly what it wanted to. So you can respect it for that. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this movie. I love Westerns like this. I love Louis L'Amour, and it felt like it was a Louis L'Amour book, and that is the highest praise that I can give a Western, is feeling like that. So yeah, some technical issues. Acting was phenomenal. Gina Carano really brought her A game. I love Gina Carano, but she's never really came across as a great actor to me. But in this, she definitely came across as a great actress with some really phenomenal scenes, especially some of the scenes at the end with her final confrontation with the villain, with Jeb. It was very well done. She did an incredible job. I'm so excited to see where the Daily Wire and her will go in the future. And I was concerned initially with the Daily Wire. I feared that they just become the anti-woke Hollywood and they just focus on making conservative movies. A lot of people did fear that, but this wasn't trying to make any statements like that. It wasn't trying to do anything like that. It was just trying to tell a good story. And I can really respect them for that. I don't really agree with the Daily Wire and a lot of stuff they do from a political sense, but I can really respect their approach to entertainment. They're not trying to be the opposite of Hollywood. They're trying to be Hollywood back in its heyday, when it was just about telling good stories politically, apolitical, and just doing what it needed to tell a good story. And I loved it for it. And a lot of people are going to give this movie lower scores than I do, mainly because I'm so invested in the Western genre. I love Louis L'Amour, and this felt like Louis L'Amour, so that is going to eke out several points for me when it comes to my review of it. So I have to give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. I really, really enjoyed it, and I recommend it to everyone. It's well worth the subscription to Daily Wire, and I can't wait to see what Gina Carano and everyone else involved in this project do in the future, because the technical stuff can be fixed with time and practice, and that's all they need. Their writing is on point, so they're well on their way to becoming a decent competitor to Hollywood and really good for the independent scene. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Anon. If you like what I do here and want to see good, compelling stories that Hollywood will no longer give you, check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues. Books 1, Down in Flames, and Book 2, Apocalypse Then, currently on sale. Book 3, Kill the Dark, coming soon.